Oh, sorry. Want a slate? There you go. Adam Savage in my cave, and I am taking questions today from tested patrons about MythBusters, and I'm answering them here in this forum. Hi. Today's question comes from Jeffrey McCullough, who says his favorite myth is lead balloon. Mine too. It's my favorite execution. Well, I can't even say favorite. You can't say which one of your kids is your favorite. The myths are like my kids. I can't choose one as a favorite. I'm glad lead balloon is your favorite. It's a really important myth for me. But what Jeffrey says is, I've heard you talk about it before, but the other day you mentioned the problems you had with the supplier's equipment failing the day you were to get the materials. This is true. So to just give you, oh, and Jeffrey wants to know, are there other stories about lead balloon? In so many ways, lead balloon is a super important part of the biography of MythBusters. The myth is that a lead balloon is something that's impossible. Hence the name of the band Led Zeppelin, who were told when they embarked upon their band that it would go over like a lead balloon. Right? Like a concrete airplane, a lead balloon is supposed to be impossible. This is a perfectly testable proposition. So the question is not, can you make a balloon out of lead? Well, that is the first question. Then the question is, how big do you want to make it? So when we started to look at lead, I'm trying to work through how we built the narrative. The first thing we need is for the balloon to be airborne. Yeah, I can make a bag out of almost any sheet material, and I can fill that bag with air. But when you say balloon, when you say lead balloon, I think the average person thinks of a balloon as something that's floating, not a bit of latex with some air captured in it. It has literally got some helium in it. So we were really clear that whatever balloon we made out of lead had to float. And that meant that we started doing this math of like, you get increased returns the bigger you get, because you are encompassing more air, more volume in the relationship between the surface area and the volume gets better and better and better for buoyancy the larger you go. The difficulty is lead is literally the material consistency or has the tensile strength of wet or damp toilet paper. I'm not joking. It is one of the most volatile, delicate materials I have ever worked with. So we started doing math. How big can the balloon be? Then we also started discussing, like, what was our balloon going to look like? And Jamie was like, well, we could just make a long bag. And I pointed out, yeah, but that is, like, sure, you could make a bag, but can we try and make it as round as possible? And Jamie admitted, yeah, it should be. Round is better than a long tube, sure. That led to this whole, how do you make, oh man. How do you use a material that does not want to be touched or handled very much at all and make a sphere in order to hold helium, and it turns out a little bit of air? We settled on building a cube, and we had to build a methodology to make that cube flat. So where we laid each piece one at a time and taped only the, oh man, there was so much planning into this. But you asked for stories that I hadn't told before. And one of them is that Jamie hated this story. He both loved this story and he hated this story. Part of the reason he hated it was because he knew how volatile and difficult rolled lead is to work with. And in the beginning, we were looking at the standard thickness you can get lead in, not the standard thickness, but the thinnest that is like regularly available is, I think, about 3 or 4 or 5 thousandths of an inch thick. Yeah. Not much thinner than that's used for shielding and other types of processes, but 3 or 4 thousandths of an inch thick. was actually way too thick for us. Our balloon was going to have to be like 20 feet in diameter, and that was never, ever, ever going to work. That's just too much to encompass. So then we started reaching out to companies to find out how thin they could make the lead. And our spec was we could make I think a 12-foot diameter balloon that was a cube with its edges like puffed out, using lead that was 0.001, 1,000th of an inch thick, about 40, about about 5,000ths of an inch thick, which is roughly 1/8 of a millimeter. There you go. That's the translation I was doing in my head. And we had a company that promised to deliver us this stuff. And yeah, their equipment broke as they were trying to make it. So we showed up on a Tuesday ready to shoot the story. And it was like, the lead's not here because the equipment broke. We're going to have to wait several months or find another company to do it. And then even then, as we were going, we were playing with the thicker lead, and it was so awful and seemed so impossible that Jamie kind of wiped the story from his head. He was like, I don't want to do this story. And then when the equipment broke, Jamie took it on himself to call around, and he found a company in Germany called Epstein Foils. And Epstein Foils made our lead in record time, and they beat our mark. We wanted 1,000th of an inch thick. They went 30% thinner than that. The lead they delivered to us was 0.0007 of an inch thick. Yeah, 7/10,000ths of an inch. Yeah, 7/10 of 1,000th of an inch. It was crazy, crazy thin. And then when we got that stuff in and I started playing with it, that's when Jamie got that. I think I do remember the specific point where I was like, Jamie, look, this is totally possible. And there was no inertia with his ability to change his mind. Heinemann was one of my favorite things about the man. He looked at it and was like, oh yeah, no, we can do this, but we're going to have to be really careful. And I'm like, I know. And that led to what felt like a week of staring into the future. Each of us trying to figure out all the ways in which building this balloon could go wrong and circumventing them. And in the end, we built up a set of contingencies for keeping this balloon from failing. That we used every single contingency, and the balloon did not fail. It successfully flew with helium. In fact, it was big enough where we needed to add some air because it was too buoyant. Yeah. And the reason it's such an important story for MythBusters is because, well, every time we outline a story, we're going to film it, and then it's going to go to the editors. And as you can imagine, the editors like to know what they're going to get. So they would be across our outline, and they would see our outline of our story, and they would make a rough plan and think, okay, this is going to be a B story. The A story was always the big episode story. The B story was the slightly smaller. The time split, we had 42 minutes. So it's usually like the A story was like a 25-minute story, and the B story was a 15-minute story. Those ratios changed, but that was roughly it. So we submitted the outline to the editorial team about Lead Balloon, and they were like, great, this is going to be a nice B story. And then their first cut came in of just that story at 55 minutes long, when it was supposed to be like 15 minutes long. We cut it down. They cut it down. They did a beautiful job. The narration, I can't remember who was producing that one. It might have been Dan Tapster. Could have been Chris Williams. Hard to say. But in the end, that was the A story of the episode that we filmed. And what it told us was that we could build thrilling narratives doing pointless, absurd things. There's no explosions. There's no fire. Lead Balloon is literally 30 minutes of storytelling about two dudes trying to just like do something that's really hard to do and succeeding at it. And that's a great story. It also was great because we were both super involved in the execution. And that changed, you know, that some stories, one of us or the other wasn't completely plugged into. That happened a lot. You can't expect us to consider every story a home run. But that one was a home run for both Jamie and I. And I submit that that's also what made the narrative really exciting to watch, because you could tell that we were involved. We were thrilled. And that is another thing that we realized was, ooh, we can tell really cool stories about stuff that's pointless and absurd as long as we're totally into it. Because it's one of the most important takeaways I have from 15, actually now 18 years of television production is that the best stories are the one in which the person that story is happening to is really involved in the story. It sounds ridiculously simple when you say it like that. But think about your favorite reality hosts. Your favorite reality hosts are plugged right in, man. Richard Hammond. Yeah, Phil Keegan. Right? These are legends. Watching them go is exciting almost no matter what they're saying. I aspire to that kind of presentation. I've quoted this line from Raymond Chandler a whole bunch in talking about this, but he says, an adventure story would be no adventure if it did not happen to a person fit for adventure. And that, I submit, is one of the things we learned on Lead Balloon, is we learned that the kind of adventures that we found thrilling and thus could tell thrilling stories about were weirder and stranger than what seemed obvious at first glance. And that allowed us to go looking for weirder and more fun stories. That's how we did, good God, that's why we did Square Wheels, Smooth Ride. It's why we did the Golf Ball Car. Both of those stories driven solely by interest from Jamie or I. Yeah, absolutely. The best stories to watch are going to be the ones in which the people they're happening to are actually interested in what's going on. Yeah. Again, I know that sounds ridiculously, simply, stupidly obvious, but if you watch a lot of reality television, you might not see as much of that as you think you're seeing. Yeah. So Lead Balloon was, people ask a lot about what our favorite stories are, our favorite myths, the most Excelsior this, the worst that. And it's impossible to choose, after all those years of making the show, any specific moments, but there are episodes or occurrences like Lead Balloon, Penny from the Empire State Building, stories like that, which altered forever the way I saw how to make the show and changed the way I thought about making the show. Those are the moments I remember. Those are the moments that stick with me. Thank you for that terrific question. Jeffrey, I appreciate it. Tested patrons, please keep submitting your questions and I will continue to answer them. Stay safe, and I will see you guys next time.